This is Street Knowledge with Chris Graham.
Welcome to the podcast, Chris Graham and Jeff Fife, and we're going to talk some UVA sports and some other fun stuff. Jeff, welcome back to the studio here.
It's good to be in the studio. I listened to our audio from me from the remote world, and although it's a new iPhone because I accidentally dunked my old one in the phone, the audio is just not the same as being in person and live. It's a much better audio quality.
You dumped your old one in the phone.
In the tub.
In the tub. So there was a story there.
No, I was just, you never text and tub.
Let that be. We're not even a minute into the podcast, and folks, you've already learned something.
No, you've already learned. Don't text and tub. And on top of it, don't text and tub with Ambien.
Yeah.
All those three. Don't text an Ambien. Don't text and tub. Don't tub an Ambien. All those things gathered together means you get a new phone.
How much all that set you back?
$700.
That's an expensive lesson right there. Okay.
Yeah, but I got one of the new iPhones, but the audio wasn't great when we called in on Monday. So it's fun to be sitting back live in the studio.
$700 and crappy audio on a podcast.
Exactly.
So,
I'm just thinking I'm going to have to invest in a $10 headset for when we make calls.
All right.
We'll see how it all goes down. So today I'm thinking we record these on Mondays and Thursdays. We're here on Thursdays. We're 4 hours from tip-off with Georgia Tech. So there's not a whole lot of point, Chris, in doing the game preview. However, we will talk a little bit about Georgia Tech and the next two road games for Virginia, but we've also got some football to talk about. But let's jump into basketball, transition to football, and then I've got some surprises for you. Random thoughts and questions.
Those lead to the best podcast anyway.
Street knowledge is what we're going to get. So let's talk about Georgia Tech coming up 3-1. I would have not when we talked about a month ago doing an ACC preview. Georgia Tech wasn't one that was at the bottom. They weren't one at the top. They were kind of nestled in the middle, and they seem to have rebounded from not a great performance non-conference jumping in. What can Virginia expect with Georgia Tech coming up here tonight? Well,
they're not the team that beat Grambling State by one. I've got to update my column here, I noticed, because I also have them losing to Grambling State. But they lost to Wofford. They're not that team. The team that was 6-7 in the pre-ACC schedule. They're the team that beat Notre Dame and Miami back-to-back at home. And, of course, that's where they're playing tonight at Atlanta. So in the Thrilla Dome, I think they call it down there. And the last time Virginia played in Atlanta 2 years ago, that was a team with Malcolm Brogdon and Anthony Gill, among others, a team that went to the Elite Eight, should have gone to the Final Four, a lot of us think. Virginia lost that game. So we know this is a tough place to play. Notre Dame and Miami can attest to it as recently as this past 10 days or so. And so what you get out of Georgia Tech is you get a team that plays a very unique defensive style. They're 10th in the country in scoring defense. They're 40th in the country in defensive efficiency. But they play zone, and they don't just play one zone. Like if you play Syracuse, you play a team that plays zone. Jeff, you were in the arena JPJ for the Syracuse game. Syracuse plays a 2-3 zone every time back down the court. Same 2-3 zone. They've been playing it for 40 years. You've got tape on it. It's hard to beat it, but you know what you're getting into. With Georgia Tech, from possession to possession, they'll play a 2-3 zone. They'll play a 3-2 zone. They'll play a 1-3-1 zone. They'll play a 1-1-3 zone. Jeff, you coach basketball. You coach youth basketball. 1-1-3 zone. I've seen it diagrammed. I watched a YouTube video of it this morning to kind of watch and see how coaches break it down. It's tough because what it does is it takes away that one soft spot in the 2-3 zone. Basically, you put a guard up top, even beyond the top of the key. Then you stick a guy at the foul line, which is where in the 2-3 zone you're supposed to attack, is right at the foul line. And so from possession to possession, Georgia Tech will change that up, and you really have to be on your toes from an offensive standpoint. What that does is, because they play 4 or 5 different zone defenses and will change it sometimes possession to possession, your guards have to recognize really quickly into a 30-second shot clock just what you will do and what the play call is. And so, it's against Syracuse, going down, if you don't have a fast break or a secondary break and you've got to set your half-court offense up, again, it's not easy to go against the 2-3 zone, but you know what you're supposed to do. Against Georgia Tech, you just don't know what you're supposed to do. So now offensively, they're challenged, 188th in the country in scoring efficiency. They shoot 43% from the field. It's like 215th in the country. So they're not a team that's going to blaze you with the offense, but they'll slow you down defensively, and that makes it an ugly game. And they ugly some games up and win them.
First one to 50 wins, sounds like. Another one of those
Yeah,
games.
the KenPom.com simulation has the final score 58-49 Virginia. So yeah, that would lend in that direction. Yeah.
It benefits us in the schedule that we get Georgia Tech after a 4-day break coming off the Sunday victory with NC State at home, and then 2 days later you take on Wake Forest. If that was reversed, only having 2 days to prepare for that bizarre mix of defenses may make it a bit more of a challenge. But, I trust in Tony and his ability to get those kids ready, and there's not too many teams more confident than UVA right now. Once that game ends, they're stepping into Wake Forest. What do you see from Wake? Do you see, they're at the bottom of the ACC standings right now. Do you expect any real challenges from Wake, or is Georgia Tech the team we really need to worry about this week?
Well, tonight, Georgia Tech certainly presents challenges defensively. Wake Forest presents some challenges. I haven't really studied them as much as Georgia Tech. I'll give them more attention tomorrow and Saturday. But I've watched Wake Forest play a couple of games this year. So, one thing they do is they play tempo. That's not to their advantage against Virginia. Nobody plays tempo against Virginia. So teams who like to push tempo tend to find themselves frustrated playing Virginia. But they've played Virginia well the last 3 seasons. There was that game down in the Lawrence Joe Coliseum that Virginia had to come back from down, 10 points with a minute to go and win on that wild 3 by Darius Thompson. That, again, was 2 years ago with that same team that went to the Elite Eight. They have size. This Wake Forest team is big, like their coach Danny Manning, who himself is 6'11", tallest coach on the planet. Their team is a big team. They'll challenge you in a different way there. They'll make you adapt to their lineup. Or actually, when teams beat them, they tend to beat them. Virginia Tech, for example, went down to Winston-Salem and stole a game on the road. Virginia Tech plays small, and they out-small balled them, and actually Danny Manning tried to adjust in the second half and go small against Virginia Tech. So, but they're a team that likes to push the pace. They've got guys who can shoot. They've got guys in the post. So that's the challenge they offer. But yeah, they've underperformed this year. I think a lot of folks, after they made the NCAA tournament last year, they were one of the last 4 in, had to play in that first 4. A lot of folks thought that was the year that Manning, he's got this program in the right direction. This year they would take another step up, and they've taken a big step back. So, they can get it turned around, but there's not a lot of time to get it turned around in the ACC this year.
UVA is obviously not going to go undefeated in the ACC this year.
Yeah.
Probably going to get saddled with 3 or 4, maybe 5 losses. Who knows? Throughout the course, it's a rough road. Who's the first one to get them? Is it going to be one of those bottom feeder teams with a surprise in a trap game? Is it going to be one of the top echelon? Is it going to happen at Duke at the end of January? Who's going to get us?
I'll equivocate on this. I would say that Georgia Tech's got a great chance tonight. The last time we played there, they won at home, and they're a team that uglies it up. And Ben Lammers in the post can be a tough guy. So, Jack Salt played him well last year in Charlottesville. I don't know that Wake is that team. Virginia then returns home Tuesday night, short turnaround to play Clemson, a team that's had surprising success this year. And then, of course, next Saturday at Duke. You're going to see 1, maybe 2 losses in the next 4 games. Virginia started 4-5 at home in the ACC. 5-0 start, that's great. Number 2 in the country, that's awesome. You said it. This ACC is just too tough. Even teams like Syracuse right now, I think 2-4 in the conference. They're projected. Joe Lunardi has them in the tournament. Even 2-4 in the ACC. That's how deep the ACC is. So, Georgia Tech's got a great shot tonight. I think Clemson's got a shot even at Virginia. And certainly, if Virginia somehow emerges unscathed through the next 3 games, the Georgia Tech, Wake, and Clemson games, going down to Durham and beating that Duke team is a tall order, to say the least. 5
of the next 7 on the road. We're recording this on Thursday. Do you feel good if you come out of this 5-2 out of this 7-game span?
Oh yeah, no question. Because like you mentioned, 5 of the 7 are on the road, and there are a couple of games against teams that on paper you should probably beat. These next 2, honestly, are games you should probably win. That Duke game is one that. That's the one that you circle and say if you win that one, you're surprised. But yeah, if you go 5-2, heck, I think if you go 4-3 and you're 9-3 in the ACC, because right now 5-0. So if you go 4-3 in the next 7, you're 9-3 in the ACC. You're probably still in first place in the ACC at that stage. Because the thing about Duke right now is the team. I think that's the other team. I think there are 2 IT teams in the ACC this year. They're Virginia, they're Duke. Duke already has 2 losses in the ACC. They've still got to play Virginia. They've still got to play Carolina twice. They've still got to play Syracuse, among other teams. So, I think the ACC champ this year is probably going to have 4, maybe even 5 losses. And, you don't have to be the ACC champ to get a high seed and a good regional and all that in the NCAA tournament. If you're 13-5 in the ACC, if you're 1 or 2 in the conference, you get that double bye. If you're 1, 2, 3, or 4 in the conference, you get the double bye. You're in good shape for the games that really matter in March. I think that's got to be the goal for this Virginia team. Virginia fans, I think, we're now accustomed to this. The first year, 2013, 2014, when that team won the ACC regular season with a 16-2 record, won the ACC tournament that year, got to the Sweet 16. We got nervous every game. Like, oh my God, the bubble's going to burst at some point. And then the next year, you start 28-1, and the focus is, my God, maybe we'll win a national championship this year. I think now folks realize these games are important. I'm not just dismissing the importance of Georgia Tech or Wake Forest or any of these games coming up between now and when the NCAA tournament starts. But we know that these games are really all about getting yourself ready, getting yourself better every day, and getting ready for those games in March because every program is measured by those games in March, and Virginia's never won a national championship in men's basketball. They've won the Virginia sports program has won lots of national championships, just not in men's basketball. And for a lot of us, that would be a life dream. And so, I think this team has that capability. So I'm saying this now to the fans listening: don't get too upset over one loss, even a couple losses. This ACC schedule is tough, and Virginia, I think this team, barring any significant injuries or anything else, I think this team is a team that's going to be playing deep into March, and maybe even into April.
Yeah, fans are going to get upset. They should go back and watch the tape of Virginia Navy football game.
That'll put you in perspective, yeah.
Yeah, so
that'll get your attitude adjusted.
If you lose 1 or 2 or 3 in the next 7 games, just pull out the football tape. And we've got football news. The schedule released midweek. Virginia's got a lot of home games. I'm going to predict early. Right now, I'm going to call it, we lose to Liberty. I can feel it. So when you take a look at that schedule, Chris, last year I asked you if this is a bowl-eligible team. You said yes. There's 6 or 7 wins here. I called for drug testing at the AFP, and because I think my question to you when the schedule came out last year was over under 3. And you went way over, and I accused you of drugs. Over under 4 on this schedule coming out. Where does Virginia land football this year?
I'll put it at 6. Because the schedule is not the schedule that John Oliver handed to Mike London, and that's why Mike London is now the coach at Howard. This team is not going to be better than the 2014 team. The 2014 team that Virginia had won 5 games. They lost a tough one to UCLA. They lost a tough one at BYU. Had a couple ACC games that they blew at the end. Should have won 8 or 9 games that year with that team. This year's Virginia team doesn't have that level of talent at all. But the schedule is very favorable. I'm going to ask for the drug testing for you after the podcast over the Liberty prediction, but that's November, so there's a lot.
I feel it.
Well, that's the Virginia angst that you have, so that's okay. I mean, it's there. The non-conference schedule very favorable. The Liberty game, it's weird. The last several years, Virginia's played all 4 of its non-conference first, and then the conference games, the last 8. This year, the Liberty game is actually not until November. That's in part Liberty. You schedule Liberty. They're an independent at the FBS level now that they've moved up, and that move is now going to be official. So they got to play 12 games against teams who are largely in conferences, except for UMass, the other FBS non-conference team that's not Notre Dame, or I guess Notre Dame's the only. Notre Dame and BYU are the other two. And so Liberty's got to play somebody in November, so they'll play Virginia this year in November. But the first 3, you've got Richmond, you're at Indiana, you've got Ohio coming in. Now, I look at those and say you're probably at worst 2-1 after that. You got the Richmond, you'll beat Richmond. Indiana beat Virginia last year in Charlottesville. I think a lot of folks think I'm one of those who thinks that if that game had been played even the next week, Virginia wins that game. I don't know that. I think Virginia might go out there and win that game, but certainly, and Ohio's a game at home. Ohio won 9 games last year, but that was in the MAC. They beat Kansas. They lost another Power 5 game by a big margin. So it was Purdue actually that they lost by a big margin. So I think a 3-0 start is certainly doable for this team. And if you then add in the Liberty game, I mean, if you're 3-1 or 4-0 in your non-conference, to get to 6, you've only got to win 2 or 3 more games. The ACC schedule is actually somewhat favorable too. I mean, you do have every year Virginia plays one Atlantic team consistently, and that's Louisville. They've matched up UVA and Louisville. This year, at least, Louisville is at home, and there's no Lamar Jackson. So hey, you get a Louisville team breaking in a new quarterback still. That's week 4. Then week 5 at NC State, that's the only one of the first month, because Virginia plays 5 games in September, that I would say, no chance of winning that game. NC State's tough. But you could be 3-2, maybe even 4-1 at the end of September. Then there's the bye week. Then you start the second half schedule. You've got Miami at home. Now, it's at least at home. It's Miami, but Virginia played Miami well last year. I'm not saying you win that game, but you at least played them well. Then you're at Duke, team Virginia's beaten the last 2 seasons. Then you got UNC at home. Virginia beat UNC on the road last year. UNC's a little down right now. You got Pitt at home on a Friday night. Then you got Liberty. The finish is tough. It's Georgia Tech, and at Virginia Tech. But I look at that and say, there's 6 wins there. I mean, and I don't think Virginia's burning any doors down to get to 6 wins there. I don't think you're playing great football to get to 6 wins there, but there's 6 wins there if you're a Virginia fan. So, I don't go in with a tremendous amount of optimism, but I don't go in with a lot of, oh my gosh, the world's going to come to an end, they're going to fire Mendenhall after year 3 either.
I hope not. But I just get this picture that we're looking ahead to Georgia Tech and Virginia Tech and forget Liberty sitting there. And, Liberty's going to have something to prove in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Being an independent team and coming out of that Division II status or whatever they call it now.
FCS for some reason.
FCS.
Even though there's championships at both levels now. So.
And I saw them, with a chip on their shoulder against Baylor, even though
a bad Baylor team.
Yes, an extremely bad Baylor team this year, or last year. So who knows? I tell you what, when I think of NC State, and we don't get to play them much in football anymore. It doesn't feel like
it's been a long time.
It's been a while since we've been to Carter Finley Stadium. When I think of NC State, I think of tailgating. There's something about that team that knows how to tailgate. Virginia Tech, we see them come. They fill up the cheap lots in Virginia, and they just drink lots of beer and play cornhole and jam obnoxious music. Nicely job, Hokies. You come in force, but you got no creativity in your tailgate. Carolina knows how to tailgate. I've been to the Panthers Stadium. I've been to Carter Finley. I've been to Keenan. The Carolina people know how to tailgate.
Well, it's all about barbecue.
It's all about barbecue.
barbecue.
Barbecue and boldness. The double B's of tailgating. I've never seen bigger, more obnoxious tailgating areas. You need a lot of parking space when you're dealing with.
I love covering games down in Carolina just because the press box always has Carolina barbecue. So nothing else, you got Carolina barbecue to look forward to.
I'm impressed. I may have to make that road trip just purely for the joy of watching them tailgate. It's beautiful. All right, I'm going to switch gears completely on you. A lot of folks listen to these podcasts, listen to the street knowledge, they listen to talk politics, they listen to talk local, talk wrestling, talk UVA sports. I don't know how many people know the Chris Graham story. Bum, bum,
the story, yes.
The Chris Graham story. This
I don't
is
know if I
your
know the Chris
life.
Graham story. Yes, I'll be interested to hear this too.
So let's fire away some Q&A and go back to the early days of Chris Graham. The
blonde hair days, right?
Yes, the blonde hair days. Chris and I were, when I say pre-children in my life, and I've got 3 teenage boys now.
One in college.
Yeah, one in college.
Sophomore in college, right? Yeah.
We so over 20 years, you and I were tailgating ourselves and season ticket holders. When I worked in the nonprofit world back in the day, early Big Brothers Big Sisters, worked for the city of Waynesboro. You at the time were either Observer or News Virginian.
Yeah.
Did you come straight out of UVA into the world of media?
Almost. Tried law school for a brief time, and that was what I oriented my life towards. I wanted to get into politics. I wanted to work in politics or eventually get into elected politics. Public policy was always something of great interest of mine. I majored in foreign affairs and constitutional law at UVA. Went to law school for a semester at the University of Richmond and quickly decided that the law was not for me, that the amount of money that you'd be borrowing to go to law school would require me not to, I wanted to come back. I wanted to be like every other person who's probably ever wanted to be a lawyer, except for those who go to Ivy League schools who know they want to work in corporate law. I wanted to be Atticus Finch. I wanted to come back to Waynesboro, put a shingle up, save the world. And when I did the math, after, unfortunately for me, getting into law school, and realized $100,000 paid back in 10 years is a lot of damn money. And you're not going to do that in Waynesboro. You're going to end up working in Richmond or D.C. in the bowels of some firm, pushing papers around for 10 years, trying to be a partner. That all came to mind real quick. And so I bounced around for a few months. I was a substitute teacher in the schools, just trying to figure out what to do. And there was a job opening at the News Virginia. I saw it advertised in the paper for part-time sports writers. And I thought, man, at the time I had decided, let's go save the world a different way. I applied for and was granted admission to the creative writing program, MFA program at UVA. So I was going to become so going from lawyer to author, I was going to do that. And but the admission wasn't going to be until the fall, so I had the whole spring off. And I thought, well, I want to be a writer anyway. I love sports. I'll go out and cover some games for $15 a night, which is what it was, $15 a night. And I'll do that. And I did it, and I never left.
So when you transitioned, you were on the Observer staff for a while, and I don't even think that paper exists anymore.
It does not.
When did you transition from the quote-unquote traditional, which is now non-traditional media, the newspapers, into the online? When did you fire up your own business?
I was at the News Virginia from 95 to 2000. I met my future wife, Crystal, there. She started working there in 99 when she graduated from Virginia Tech. And she got a job at the Observer in 2000 as their editor, their managing editor. And about 6 months later, I joined her there, and we worked there for a couple of years. That paper unfortunately went under. And at that time, that forced our hands. We weren't thinking. We were actually, when we left the News Virginia to go work at the Observer, part of our thinking was we'll go work at a small place. We'll learn how the business is run. Because, we worked at the News Virginia, and we were strictly newsroom editorial people. We wanted to learn hands-on how a business is run because our goal eventually was to start our own weekly newspaper and do it here back in Waynesboro. So our hand was forced when that paper started going under, the Observer newspaper started going under. So we launched Augusta Free Press upon leaving the Observer in July of 2002 with the intent of using the website as a way to get attention towards the eventual build towards a weekly paper. And in fact, the first few issues, if you want to call them that, of the Augusta Free Press, the online issues, were essentially a weekly paper. Until we realized, hey, the internet is 24/7, so why are we only writing once a week? Let's do something a little more frequent. And so the Augusta Free Press evolved over time. But yeah, it was the whole intent was just to launch a weekly paper here in Waynesboro, and like you said, the media's changed since 2002, and we've changed with it.
Your media credentials.
Mm-hmm.
When did you get your first media credential to cover a Virginia game? Was that under the Jim Gordon era of the News Virginian?
Yeah. Jim Gordon was famous for this. Jim Gordon, for folks who have followed Virginia sports for a long, long time, especially would maybe remember the name. Jim was the sports editor at the News Virginia, I think starting in 66 or 67, and he eventually retired from there in 2002. He had a big group of guys who worked under him as part-time sports writers. When I answered that ad, part-time sports writer, $15 a game, a lot of us did that. Patrick Height, who's now the sports editor at the News Leader, is among that group. And so there's a lot of good guys out there who work. And Scott German, who works with us here at AFP, he was another one of those guys. Scott covered the 2 Final Fours under Jim's name. So I worked for Jim, and Jim, though, he was such a local guy, focused guy, that he had the credentials to UVA sports, and he had, his parking pass. This is back in the day when the media still parked in the main parking lot of Scott Stadium for football games. His parking pass number was 6. He practically parked in the stadium. He had been there that long. This guy had that kind of respect there at UVA and that kind of longevity at UVA. So, he would give the passes out to guys, his $15 a game guys, because Chris. The ACC tournament's next week. Waynesboro girls volleyball's got a big district game next week, so I don't know if I can go down to the ACC tournament. You want to go cover that for me, Jim? Sure, I'll go cover that for you. I'll go down and sit courtside at the ACC tournament for 4 days. I'll do that for you, Jim. So, yeah, those were the first days, and then when we started AFP, the online news media, the question we got for years from everybody, not just sports folks, but everybody. So what paper does this appear in? There's no paper. So where can I read this? It's online, AugustaFreePress.com. How does that work? just enter the information into, Google. What's Google? So Rich Murray, who was the longtime SID at UVA, he might have stayed there until about 2007, 2008, somewhere in that range, I think. And Rich used to be, actually, he was a Waynesboro Generals play-by-play guy at WAYB. I don't know if you knew that or not. But Rich Murray, Rich still does. He's been retired for about 10 years. He still works with UVA. He'll work with them during baseball season as a media relations guy, just kind of ad hoc. But in about 2005, I got the balls, I'll just call it that, to apply for a credential without a paper, because everybody's asking, where's the paper? Where's the paper? There's no paper. And I applied for a credential, and Rich knew me, and I think this was a big part of it. He knew me from covering with the News Virginia, and then when I went to the Observer, I was a sports editor of the Observer for 2 years. And he said, Chris, I'm going out on a limb here. I know you, and I trust that you'll use this the right way. But the big fear then was that internet sports guys tended to be recruiting guys. And, of course, college coaches can't talk about recruits until they've signed the letter of intent. And so the big fear was, we're letting these internet guys in, and they're going to talk about recruiting, and that's going to get our coaches in trouble, and so we can't have those internet guys in here. But Rich knew that I wasn't a recruiting guy. I was a sports writer guy. So it was us and the Sabre the first year. I want to say that was the football season of 2005, fall of 2005, that we were the first two non-newspaper TV radio, the first non-traditional sports media credential at UVA. It was us and the Sabre. And now, like you said, it's almost flipped, that there's a few newspaper people and a lot of internet people. But back then, Rich was going out on a limb to give us a pass, and good for him and good for us that we were among that first group.
And you were blazing a path also on the radio, WTON,
Sure, yeah.
Star 94.3. Boy, you followed the locker room. What was the name of that? You and Patrick were doing a radio show. ACC Nation?
Well, that was ACC Nation. There was a show before that ACC Nation was birthed out of, and I'm trying to remember the name of that. It was a daily show, Monday through Friday. We did on WTON for about a year. So every day I had to drive to Stanton for a year, every weekday for a year. I wish I could remember the name of that. It was like the daily. I even did a deep voice, like the Daily Sports Crunch or something like that. It was something like that. And so I remember how the ACC Nation got birthed. Patrick and I were covering a UVA. It was the UVA Maryland football game in 2004. I just remember this. We were driving over the mountain, and we were talking about, now, this WTON thing's nice, but we're not making any money doing it. What if we syndicated a show? Now, if we syndicate a show, how do we syndicate a show? Well, we're going to need to do more than just UVA. We're going to have to do more than just local. Nobody's going to care about Stanton, Waynesboro, in Richmond, or wherever else. So ACC Nation came about. Let's already on that show, that daily show in Stanton, we were interviewing writers like Jeff White at the Times-Dispatch then. We were interviewing beat writers who covered ACC schools for papers all up and down the East Coast. So the concept was, let's cover the ACC as our home team, the whole ACC. We'll do that as our home team. And so we did that on WTON. So the daily show continued, but once a week it became ACC Nation. We did that for about a year, and then we left that station and just did it on our own for about 4 more years. And we had stations. At one point, I think we had 12 to 14 stations up and down the East Coast. We had one down in Florida, a bunch in Virginia, some in North Carolina. We didn't make any money at it, but it was hellacious fun. We had guests like John Feinstein Jr. We had Dick Vitale on one time, which was really cool. Called Dick Vitale. We saw Dick Vitale at a game. Hey, Dick, Dickie V, will you be on our show? Gives me his home phone number. Now, he scribbles it down, everything else. Didn't have a card, just scribbles down his phone number. I remember picking up the phone, calling his phone number, and the person answered the phone and says, hello? And I'm thinking, oh, God, I got the wrong number, and this person's probably pissed because they always get wrong phone numbers for Dick Vitale. And I feel like the biggest idiot in the world, but I've got to say these words. I'm calling for Dick Vitale. And he goes immediately from hello to, hey, baby, it's ACC Nation, isn't it? So turned it on just like that. But, we had...
Dave Barry on.
We had Dave Barry. Dave Barry. We had his wife, Michelle Kaufman. She was a regular on our show, and we had her as a regular for years. She writes for the Miami Herald. I think she still writes for the Miami Herald, covering University of Miami sports. And so Patrick and I were both big Dave Barry fans, and through context clues, it was never like official that, Dave always mentions, he occasionally mentioned in his columns his wife was a sports writer, and, that kind of thing. So just on a limb, we're going to see if that's actually true. So we had Michelle on. We were talking about whatever Miami game was coming up that week, and so Patrick was the one who was brave enough to ask the question. So Michelle, I have to ask you this question. We think we figured something out. Is Dave Barry your husband? And she says yes. And if you want to talk to him, he's right here. And so it happened that we were interviewing her that day. They were at Disneyland with their family, and she's taking 15 minutes to talk to ACC Nation. I mean, that seems absurd. But yeah, we talked to Dave Barry, and I don't know that we even asked anything substantial because we were both starstruck to be talking to Dave Barry. But yeah, that was definitely a highlight in ACC Nation lore.
When did the book fall into this time continuum?
Yeah, it was 2006. The book Mad About You: 4 Decades of Basketball at University Hall. Patrick and I each had credentials to UVA sports. ACC Nation had one credential. Augusta Free Press had one credential. Rich was pleasant enough to seat us side by side. So often at games, we would just brainstorm. What can we do? And so the last season at UVA, I think around December of that last season at U-Hall, which was the 2005-2006 season. One of those drives over, because we always drove over to the games, drove back, we had the idea, hey, I wonder if anybody's writing a book about the history of University Hall. At that time, of course, we have guys like John Feinstein on our show, and we're starting to think, hey, we could do this. I'm a writer. You're a writer. We could write a book. And so the next couple of games, we would ask other reporters, hey, have you heard anything? Is anybody writing a book about the history of U-Hall? Even ask Rich Murray. No, he would have known it better than anybody because they would have gone through him to get a lot of interview requests done. And so we realized about right before Christmas, nobody's writing a book about the history of U-Hall. It's going to be us. And so we wanted, the time frame at that point was pretty quick because we wanted the book out before the next basketball season, and then we even pushed it up to try to get out before the next football season just to have extra time to advertise the book. So we start around January 1st, and we're trying to track down everybody we could track down to talk about the history of University Hall. And so that gave us about 5 months to do the interviews. We had about a month to put it all together and write it and edit it and everything else. But we tracked down some really interesting people. I mean, Willie Durst talking about the check-in game, the end of that game against Duke, the famous where Jeff Jones tried to use him to check in with 5 seconds to go to get extra time out, and they screwed up the check-in, and Wojciechowski gets fouled, and they screw Virginia out of a game. And we interviewed all the participants. That wrote a whole chapter on that game. There was a game, a women's game actually, where the fire marshal had an issue with how many people were let in on general admission tickets, and so UVA's University Hall used to have about a 12,000 capacity. That went down to 9,000 because of what's called hot dog night. They gave out free hot dogs. Everybody came to the game. 12,000 people come to a game. Now we have, for the free hot dogs, we no longer can have 12,000 people at UVA men's games either. There were so many stories like
Ralph's
that.
house. The image of you interviewed found the guy who described hanging off the side of the roof.
Yeah. and tracking these people down sometimes was easy. Rich Murray had a lot of information, obviously, being the UVA sports information director at the time. Some people were really hard to find. Willie Durst we found. I remember he was getting married that spring. He was I think he may have been the last or second to last guy we interviewed. He was getting married. I was just doing Google search after Google search. I found the website his fiancée had put up for their wedding gift registry for a William Durst, and I'm like, it looks kind of like him. It's 10 years later. He's gotten a little chubbier in the face, but it looks kind of like Willie. Send an email out. There were a lot of those emails where you just kind of threw it out there. Hey, if it's not you, if you're not the guy, I'm sorry. Brian Stith was a fun interview. I'm kind of just scatter shooting here now, but Brian Stith was a fun interview on the phone. At the end of the interview, he asked me a question. So I'm asking Brian Stith all these great questions, and Brian Stith asked me a question at the end. What are they doing with that big poster of Ralph Sampson and Patrick Ewing that was there right at the entrance to U-Hall? And I said, I don't know. He said, well, if you have any pull, can you get that for me?
Interesting.
Because he played 3 high school state championship games, and those back in that day they were played at U-Hall. The state championship games were played there. And he said when he was a sophomore and saw that poster, that's when he decided to go to UVA. The other great story that I remember was Curtis Staples. I mean, another name from UVA basketball past. the all-time leader in made threes until I think did J.J. Redick pass him in the made threes category? I think that's the case. So 2 guys from Roanoke were the 1 and 2 in made threes. Maybe something in the water down in Roanoke. He tells me that he wouldn't have even come to UVA except for 2 things. He was recruited by Carolina first. He was a McDonald's All-American recruited by North Carolina, and George Lynch had gone to his high school, and George Lynch was heavy on recruiting him too. And he was going to go to Carolina until Phil Ford came up to him early in his senior season of high school and said, so playing time is going to be tough for you the first couple of years. And Curtis said he looked at Phil Ford and said, I'm a McDonald's All-American. And Phil Ford looks back at him and said, we got 6 on our roster right now. You might play when you're a junior. So he reopens his recruiting and goes to Wake Forest. And he said if he would have known that the guy that he spent the weekend with on his recruiting visit that fall would have turned out to be Tim Duncan. He said Tim Duncan sat in a corner, arms folded, the whole weekend, didn't say a word. And he thought, this is the weirdest guy I've ever been around. If this is what this place is like, I don't want to go to Wake Forest. I'm going to go to Virginia. If he would have known that guy was going to be Tim Duncan, imagine Tim Duncan getting double teamed in the post, kicking it out to a wide open Curtis Staples for 3. He already set at the time the career record for made threes. He might have doubled that with Tim Duncan getting those double teams. So some fun stories. Maybe not the best story, that one, because we wouldn't have had Curtis Staples, but it's a lot of interesting insight because of all those interviews we did.
So you go from the then traditional newspaper and then find yourself searching and create your own business environment. You've done the book, you've done the radio, now you've got the regular podcast. When you look at the landscape of Virginia sports and now you see all the newbies coming up that you were some 15, 20 years ago, it's got to be rewarding. What your overall hits, so to speak, the viewership, the readership of Augusta Free Press, is it the 2nd or 3rd largest in the state of Virginia for Virginia sports right now? Yeah,
it is. And, we've had an explosion in the last few months. I mean, we get 20,000 unique visitors a day to the site. I remember back the first year of AFP, I'd get happy if we had 100 people in a day look at the site. And I was extremely happy at 100, because that's 100 people. That's 99 more than me, because I'm sure my clicks counted too. To think that that's the case, and to see the positive impact, I like to think that we have, because I think what we bring to it, what I try to bring to it, I know that the traditional writers, the traditional newspaper right now, and except for David Teal, I think David Teal, he's deserved the 20-time Virginia Sports Writer of the Year or whatever he is. He won it again this year. David Teal at the Daily Press is he's John Feinstein level. If you haven't read his stuff, and if you're not a Virginia or Virginia Tech sports fan, you probably haven't. But he's John Feinstein level, just hasn't got that recognition nationally. But for the most part, you still see in the mainstream media recaps, just the basic quotes, the game score quote, stats quote, that kind of thing. What I try to bring to it is a level of analysis. I love basketball. I've told you this before, but I foolishly probably took an advanced basketball theory class when I was in college. At the time, I thought this is fun. It's also an easy credit, so I might as well take it. But I spend way too much time thinking when I'm driving around about breaking down X's and O's of plays, how this defense works, how this offensive play works. And I try to bring that to the coverage that we have, and I think it shows. I think that's why people come to AFP, and also I think what we bring is, I'm a homer. I literally have a V saber tattoo on my left shoulder. I am a graduate. I've got a big degree hanging up on my wall above my desk, but I'm not afraid to call out spade a spade when you need to. I'll throw the question out there like I did for many years about Mike London. Is Mike London the best coach for UVA football? Is Craig Littlepage erring by keeping London on? Even back to Pete Gillen, I probably ruffled some feathers raising questions about that back in the day. But, I love UVA sports, but it's not that, our guys can't do wrong. Certainly they can, and I think when you need to call them out, you need to call them out. And so, I think what they like about what we give them is honesty. There's honesty about the game, whether it's win or loss. You could probably tell from the last 3 games, the coverage of the last 3 games from us, Virginia's number 2 in the country, have won 8 straight. They've only lost once this year. And what you hear me talking about is defensive rebounding is a problem, too many turnovers. I mean, so, I try to bring that sensibility to things. And it's unique. I mean, and we fill that niche. I mean, guys like Cavs Corner. I sit beside Brad Franklin at the basketball games. Love Brad. He and I and Scott have a running commentary during games about the games going on. Brad's more of a recruiting guy. He knows recruiting up and down and every which way. Chris Wright at the Sabre also. He's a basketball coach himself. He coaches, I think, a JV team at one of the Albemarle County private schools. I think that's right. But I know he talks about X's and O's a lot too. Chris knows the X's and O's, and he knows recruiting. So there's a lot of niches there. But I think that's the cool thing about the internet media that we add to all that traditional coverage. We don't just give you the score stat quote kind of story. We give you that insight, that analysis, and that inside knowledge. And I guess because we were among the first credentialed, we probably are among the people who helped start that trend, and I feel pretty good about that.
Excellent. And I know the fans feel good about it because they come in flocks and they enjoy the coverage. And there's lots of coverage not only for Virginia sports but for all the major sports and the ACC coverage in politics and local activities. So we appreciate everything that you're doing here in this landscape, and it's been fun to catch a little bit of the history of Chris Graham and the AFP. What a bizarre Thursday. We went in odd directions, but I enjoyed it thoroughly. So stay close to the AFP because there is 2 games coming up here. We'll have a Georgia Tech wrap-up with you and Scott, I'm sure. You've got the Wake Forest game coming up, some coverage on that. So for all of your Virginia sports and random thoughts, stay with Street Knowledge, stay with Chris Graham, and stay with the AFP. Have a great week.